This is Meadowbank, the headquarters of the Battle of Flowers. John and Violet Peck have years of experience of building and designing floats, having entered exhibits in the battle for over 23 years.
Started off the friend, Eddie LaBailey, another old stalwart. That was the Grand National.
That's right,
1973. And it just boomeranged from there. But we do get our disasters and rows.
Oh, yeah. Well, now we never have a row, my love.
Oh.
No, you know.
We have plenty of them. This is the time I enjoy.
Yeah. Sticking the fresh flowers and and all the people coming in to see us and all the visitors.
As well as normal flowers and paper flowers, some exhibitors decorate their floats in purely wild flowers. Mrs. LeKelleneck is one such exhibitor.
Mum used to enter about 30 years ago, and she always used to use wild flowers, so I just thought I'd follow suit. I wanted a Jersey theme rather than like a Disney one, so we had to think of some legend or something that included the horse, and so we just thought of the legend of Hoogby.
The last few days running up to battle are hectic, with millions of flowers and hundreds of people. Everyone works around the clock to finish off their floats ready for the big day. The atmosphere is electric and the social camaraderie closer than ever, all the family getting involved. This is undoubtedly the biggest and most fun-packed event in Jersey's calendar, with thousands of locals and visitors taking part to make it a day never to be forgotten.
When I was asked to be Mr. Battle or King Battle, I couldn't believe it. I thought that would be last year. But to be back again and to be back, backstage, as it were, and see it all being put together, it's one of the most exciting things ever. Isn't it wonderful?
It is. The atmosphere is brilliant.
So it was a natural choice to have stage and television celebrity Lionel Blair as this year's Mr. Battle, and the beautiful Jenny Hill as the 1995 Miss Battle of Flowers. We all know they're going to have a wonderful day tomorrow.
And what time are you going to go to bed tonight? You're going to go to bed? 11?
Well, maybe the kids might be off to bed at 11, but after many months of planning, preparing and building the floats, no one is going to sleep tonight. There's still plenty of work to do to ensure that when those floats roll into the arena in the morning, they'll not only be spectacular, but will do the exhibitors proud and make all that work and dedication put in by so many people all worthwhile. The excitement, suspense and exhilaration that we all witnessed last night has not died out, but has continued and been carried on to the arena for this wonderful parade. The sun is out and is shining gloriously, and the arena is packed with thousands of spectators eagerly awaiting the surprises in store. And what better way than to head the procession than with Miss Battle float carrying Jenny Hill, this year's Miss Battle, and of course Mr. Battle, Lionel Blair. Also on the float are the two maids of honour, Hannah Stewart-Jones and Vicky Goddard. The float they're on is a completely new design and construction. It's being built very kindly by nurses on the island who've been volunteered, and their time and help to join in the community spirit and help battle go with a bang. Most of the floats that you'll see in today's parade have been made of wood, with just the heads of the flowers stuck directly onto the exhibit. This one is different. Underneath is a wooden frame which is then covered with the oasis material. Then on top of that there's wire mesh, and the flowers are then attached by pushing them through the mesh and embedding the stems into the oasis. This enables the flowers to stand proud of the float and gives the appearance that they're growing off the float, as it were. This entry comes from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, which is a state's department. For those of you who have visited the Battle of Flowers in previous years, you may remember that the department used to use tractors. This is a completely new design this year, and I think they've done remarkably well. Of course, it's not only locals that take part in the Battle of Flowers, but also visitors from overseas. This train comes from Hastings and is entered into the battle by R.E. Morgan & Son Limited. They're manufacturers of building and gardening material, and apparently during the recession, the owner of the company had very little to do and decided to spend his time reconstructing this train. On the train, they're carrying the cast from Swanson's Hotel, the cabaret there, the minstrels on parade. Themes are very important in the Battle of Flowers, and it must be tremendously difficult to continue year after year to come up with not only new ideas, but also original ones too. This entry by Nigel Gates and Friends is called Into the Woods, just as in the Stephen Sondheim musical. Nigel told me that the idea was to feature all the nursery rhyme and fairy tale characters that ever went into the woods. So it's not surprising to see Little Red Riding Hood, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, and the Sleeping Beauty featured on this exhibit. This must be a sure winner with the children in the arena. The float's very impressive, but even more so when you look closely at the detailed work, which sometimes is missed out when you're sitting in the arena. One of the most eye-catching features about this is the ivy that creeps up the side of the pillars at the back of the float. They're made from crepe paper, but look so remarkably realistic. I actually wondered whether it was worth going into so much detail, considering that many people in the stands would miss it, because you have to be so close up to appreciate the workmanship that's involved. Nigel tells me that it's not only for self-satisfaction, but of course also for the judging. The panel of judges, all with many years of experience, noticing and taking account of features like this. The float's accompanied by Friends, and all the costumes are designed and made by Nigel Gates and Simon Thomas. When I visited the float in the shed, the designers and I actually tried to calculate how many reams of tissue paper it took to make all the flowers, but gave up when we began to lose count. The Jersey Pearl Satellite Majorettes are taking part in the battle this afternoon, formed in 1983 and currently with a membership of 40 girls. The troupe can be seen performing throughout the year in the island at fetes and various other functions. Last year, the troupe returned home from competitions in the UK with 4th, 3rd and 1st and 2nd places in various team events. They're very popular with the crowds in the arena. The Jersey Battle of Flowers Association have their own mascot, and this is him. Battleby. Again, he's very popular with the children in the audience, and throughout the year he can be seen entertaining the crowds at various functions and events around the island. This float's been entered by Mrs. Lekelenek and is entitled The Legend of Lehugby. For those of you who are visitors of the island, you may have visited that, which is in the parish of Grouville. This has been made entirely from wild flowers. For many years, Mrs. Florence Bachelet has been entering the Battle of Flowers and has been using just wild flowers, and now the tradition continues with this entry. You would have seen earlier on our interview with John and Violet Peck. This is their entry called the Dutch Treat. It features chrysanthemums, 25,000 of those, plus hares, tails, pampas grass and marram grass. John Peck and Vi Peck and their 3 children, Julie, Gary and David, built this float and entered it into today's procession. They've been entering floats in the Battle of Flowers for 23 years now. Last year, the Association of Retired Persons made their first entry into the Battle of Flowers. Well, they enjoyed themselves so much that they're back again once more in this year's parade. It's an entirely paper float and has been made by the members of the association, who number more than 200. It's been kindly sponsored by local brewers, Ann Street, and also the Seymour chain of hotels. The float depicts a summer holiday, which is apt and fitting for Jersey, the Sunshine Island, where thousands of tourists flock each year. Perhaps you were one of them. This float you can now see, of course, is from Kodak. Kodak very kindly sponsored the Disney characters who come and take part in the Battle of Flowers parade. The Jersey Battle of Flowers has a long and interesting history attached to it, which even many of the locals on the island are unaware of. Indeed, many of them would be surprised to hear how the first battle was staged. It was so different from the current festivities. It was on the 9th of August 1902 that the island of Jersey saw the first Battle of Flowers, arranged and staged to celebrate the coronation of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. Who would have guessed that now, more than 90 years after those early celebrations, that the battle would still be going strong and enjoyed by thousands of spectators? As many of you are aware, the Channel Islands was the only soil in the British Isles to be occupied by the German forces during World War II. Liberation came to the islanders of Jersey on May the 9th, 1945, and this year, 1995, saw tremendous celebrations in the island to mark the 50th anniversary of freedom from the oppression and hardship. This float continues that theme. During the war, which of course was one of the only few times that the Battle of Flowers was interrupted, all the youth organisations were banned. The Jersey Boys Brigade, however, who've entered this float, continued during the war years to meet in secret. And this entry marks not only the liberation of Jersey, but also the liberation of the prohibition on groups such as this. And as you can see, the float is coloured red, white and blue. The Boys Brigade know a thing or two about winning as well. They've managed to pick up the award for the winning float in the Senior Youth Club section, 3 years now on the trot. This float's been entered by the Lebrun family and friends and is entitled Aladdin, and is decorated entirely with hares, tails and asters, all coloured white, purple and pink. As you'll see, Aladdin and Jasmine ride on their magic carpet with the beautiful Palace of Agrabah as their backdrop. All the flesh flowering has been done by the children under 16, the building by Trevor Lebrun, assisted by James Jury and Andy Blompier, and it's very much a junior exhibitor's effort.
Very welcome visitors this afternoon.
This entry is by Gary Edwards, aged 7, is entitled Yabba Dabba Doo, and features Fred Flintstone seated on a dinosaur in bedrock quarry just as the whistlebird signals the end of another workday. Apparently, Gary is only 7 years old and has always enjoyed being a spectator at the Battle of Flowers and was fascinated by the large floats and how they were made, especially by the optimists. Last year, he helped make some paper flowers for his brother's cub float and wasn't allowed to do much else. So he asks the rest of his family whether he could make a float for himself with some friends of his age. She promised to look into it, and with a lot of support, here they are today on the arena, and a magnificent first attempt.
Something with the winning button so you can hear what we're doing. So we can act.
There's about 5 or 6 bands taking part in today's parade. This is the Romsey Old Cadet Carnival Show Band, and probably one of the brightest and fun-loving bands the Battle Parade has seen in recent years. The band's origins go back to 1963, when a group of Army cadets participated in the Romsey Town Carnival. The band's noted for its changes of costumes each year. Last time in Jersey they were dressed as teddy bears, and this year, as you can see, they're dressed as gnomes and elves. Sandy Blompier has been entering the parade ever since paper flower floats were permitted. I spoke to her the other night and she took me through the various stages in building the entry. Underneath the float is shelving steel, which is bolted together and then covered with very thin plywood, or in the case of the front and back of this float, cardboard. The teddy bears are made of papier-mâché. The first stage is to form a type of mould. Sandy uses large stuffed polythene bags shaped into the desired form and then applies the papier-mâché. Once that's dried, the bags are then taken out to leave just the hardened and set paper figure. This, of course, is extremely light, and that has the benefit of not having to use a substantial base, and of course makes transporting the float up and down the arena much easier as well. The idea for the float came from a tapestry that was on her grandson's wall, and although it may be hard to believe when you look at it, the building of this float only began last week. Under the leadership and musical direction of its founder, Steve Roxton, the Jersey Accordion Band Club was formed in 1991 from students of the accordion. All band members belong to Les Amis de l'Accordion de Jersey, a social club for anyone interested in accordion music, who meet every Tuesday of every month at one of the local public houses. The band play at club meetings and at many fetes during the summer months, and are even popular during the late-night Christmas shopping evenings. However, of course, the jewel in the crown of the band's performances has to be its participation in the Battle of Flower Parades during the past 3 years. Summer Holiday has been entered by Donald Holloway. Originally, the group who produced this float were the 6th Jersey Scout Group, but have now subdivided and formed an independent entry. Still, saying that, accompanying the float are members of the Manton Cub Pack from the same Scout Group. Although the builders had designed the float well in advance this year, they couldn't actually start putting those plans into practice until very late in the run-up to battle because of the lack of float building space. But a tremendous effort, and one which will be very popular with the crowds. The Battle of Flowers, of course, wouldn't be the same without an appearance by Jersey's own much-acclaimed Island Band. The band originated in 1872 and was known under a different name. In 19 1962, woodwind instruments were dropped and the band became a pure brass band with a drum corps. The band is completely self-supporting, members coming from all walks of life. The band of the island of Jersey are constantly in great demand, both in Jersey and in France. And once again, of course, the float of the afternoon, the Miss Battle float, carrying Jenny Hill, who is the 1995 Miss Battle of Flowers. Jenny is an A-level student at the Jersey College of Girls here in Jersey and is also this year's Miss St Saviour. She's accompanied by Lionel Blair, who was in Jersey last year, in fact, with Sue Pollard and Les Dennis at the Opera House. Also on the float are the two Maids of Honour, who this year are Hannah Stewart-Jones, crowned Miss St Helier earlier in the year. Hannah's other claim to fame, as well as being a full-time student, is that she's also a part-time radio presenter with Channel 103. The other Maid of Honour is Vicky Gollard, who's 18 and currently a student at Beaulieu Convent School, where she's taking her A-levels. She was also a runner-up in the Miss St Lawrence competition. Mary Bidder has been entering the Battle of Flowers for 14 years now and has obviously been bit by the carnival bug. As I've said, the exhibitors come in all forms, from clubs and societies and parish floats to the smaller groups and individuals. Mary Bidder is one such individual entry and is eagerly trying to encourage the rest of her family to continue the tradition. I'm sure that if they have as much fun and success as Mary has had, they won't need that much encouraging. This is called Sing Along with Mary, for some Disney fun, and is 45 feet in length and 16 feet high, has 70,000 chrysanthemums and thousands of hairtails. On the float are all popular Disney characters. As you can see, they even have animated parts. All members of the family take part, children of all ages and adults too. The Jersey Young Farmers Club is a social organisation on the island which has been going for a number of years. They get involved in many local events and are also responsible for staging many of their own events during the year. They have about 50 members at the moment and were founded by one of the island's ex-politicians, John Lamarcon. Although you don't have to be a farmer to join their club, it is fitting that with a name such as theirs they enter the Battle of Flowers. This year's entry is called Dutch Delight. They've been lucky enough to find sponsors to help cover the cost of their float, and it was the sponsors themselves who suggested the theme. Many of the exhibitors that I've spoken to have said that trying to come up with an idea for a float is the hardest, so perhaps it's a help, not only financially, but also in terms of deciding on a subject for your exhibit, to have such a helpful sponsor. The young farmers have been entering the battle for years now, and the ones that I've seen in the years previous always have complicated mechanics and animation. This year's is no exception. In the centre of the float, there's a turntable which revolves with mice on, going underneath two arches, as in the song Mice and a Windmill. Mechanical floats are, of course, a risk. It's great if everything goes according to plan, but there's always the chance of something going wrong. And, well, if it does, it may be irreparable when you consider the time it may take to fix and the fact that, of course, the float is constantly on the move down the arena. However, the young farmers have played safe in terms of the windmill sails. Instead of relying on motors and the like, they've installed a man inside the windmill whose sole job it is to crank the handle and turn the sails. So, providing his arm stands up to the strain, those sails will continue to turn throughout the afternoon. The children in the audience will know all about Casper the Ghost and the film, which has only recently been released. This entry by the Optimus Club fits in nicely with that theme and is called Spooky Express. There's always something that can be done to a float to improve it or make it stand out as different from the others. What I think is particularly appealing about this entry is the clever structural design. Running through the ghost train is steel, but so well hidden that it gives the appearance that the train just floats in midair. Even the buffers between the carriages have been slightly offset from each other, which makes each carriage look unconnected from the other. The Optimists are no strangers to battle and have been entering for over 12 years. In that time, they've picked up award after award. Last year, they won with their float based on the musical Miss Saigon, which was a fantastic entry. This year, I think, is just as good and perhaps even better. Many of the main floats in this afternoon's parade also have a junior entry. This is the Optimist Club's Juniors float and is entitled At the Stroke of Midnight and has been sponsored by Classic Affairs. It has over 15,000 chrysanthemums, 800 asters, hairstyles and dried flowers. This is one of the parish entries, but one of the junior parish entries, entitled El Gran Queso. It's a Mexican riverboat, floating carnival seen on the Mexican riverways and the Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas. Each boat has its own name and theme, i.e. flowers and fruit, and this festival also takes place at night, which is very spectacular. These boats also ferry passengers to other parts of the festival. It's decorated with over 5,000 chrysanthemums, 4,000 asters, and 2,000 hare's tails of various colours, red, green, purple and white. If you've been to the battle before, over the past few years, you may have remembered the entry from the parish of St. Helier. They tend to focus on a carnival theme, and this year's is called Mexican River Festival. St. Helier is the main town in Jersey, and this float has been built by locals from the parish. St. Helier actually stopped entering the Battle of Flowers for some time, but then reformed a new work group, and this is now their 8th entry after their period of absence. Again, St. Helier is one of the entries that enjoy putting animated parts onto their float, as you can see on the back of this one. What makes all these floats, of course, even better is the participation and the people that accompany the float. Just because we're in the middle of summer doesn't mean that the theme of a float can't be winter, so St. Wan's Parish, realising that, have entered this magnificent piece, Santa's Grotto. The team are entirely new this year. Some of them have had float building experience before, but many are complete novices. I spoke to Ian Legale, the group leader, and he told me how he'd pulled the volunteers together by sending out a newsletter with all the parish's rates bills. He said that many people want to become involved in the preparation, but don't know quite how to go about it, thus the invitation to all and sundry to lend a helping hand. On the back of the float, there's a detailed hare's tails piece, which was taken directly from a design on the Christmas card. As with many of the floats, it comes with its own sound system, which is driven by 2 generators housed in Santa's Grotto. Ian informs me that this is the loudest and most noisiest float ever to appear in the Battle of Flowers. Carrying on the theme of the main parish float is the St. Wan's Juniors entry. This is Santa's workshop, with all the Christmas elves busily at work making toys. This is a completely new group who've had no previous experience in the battle, and as I'm sure you agree, it's a brilliant exhibit. You may be aware that Jersey is divided into 12 parishes. Not every parish enters a float, some are only putting it in an exhibit on alternate years, but St. Martin's Parish have done themselves proud with this entry entitled Flight of Fantasy. The most coveted award in the Jersey Battle of Flowers is the Prix d'Honneur, and this year it goes to this entry, and I'm sure that's the correct choice. On the front of the float you can see 2 Pegasus, the mythical winged horses, which have been covered in hare's tails. Underneath all that colour is fiberglass forms, which I think is clever, and the wings are also made of fiberglass. Because of the way they've been attached to the horses, and the same for the butterflies, they actually move slightly in the breeze, giving them a flighty feeling, which is the whole basis of the float, if you excuse the pun. It's one of the larger classes of float with a height of over 17 feet. As with many of these bigger floats, they've been made in sections and then assembled outside the warehouse just before the parade because of size restrictions inside the shed. As I said, some parish floats also have a junior group, and it's the juniors who inevitably end up as the adult float builders in the years to come. Not only does this give them the experience that they need, but also gives them a chance to work on an exhibit of their own, something that they can be proud of. St. Martin's Juniors have put together this Magic Dragon theme float. This is a parish float ended by St. Clement, who've been exhibiting in the battle for 37 years. Probably the most striking feature on this is the camel, which is made entirely from hare's tails. Despite the size and the intricate craftsmanship, I'm told it only took a week to build, although they did say that that was working completely around the clock. The base of the float is a royal barge, and being carried on board is Nefertiti and Tutankhamun, the famous Egyptian boy king. He's actually the designer of the float, Marcus Davies, and has been designing the St. Clement's entry for a considerable number of years now. Also accompanying the float are pupils from the local Academy of Dance. When I visited the various floats being built, Lynn Hine, the group leader, told me that the columns were the most time-consuming to build. Although they may look vast, the amount of flowers on those columns alone is staggering. Each row of flowers total 36. Multiply that by the amount of rows that make up each one, and then multiply that by the number of columns, and well, almost a field full. As I said, St Clement are no strangers to the battle, but also they're not unused to receiving prizes and awards. They've picked up the Prix d'Honneur, the highest and most coveted award, no less than 9 times, and the second prize of Prix d'Excellence 13 times, not to mention all the other awards. This year, this float has gained them the best parish entry. Floats are made of a chassis and then completely covered with wood. Some exhibitors have made changes to this form, and this entry from the parish of Grouville is just one. The float is almost in 2 sections, being joined by 2 girders which have been covered with flowers. This gives a much more open design, but also creates its own difficulties. Because of the design, the driving unit has had to be modified so that in the back, inside the witch's cauldron, the main tractor part is housed, and the front wheels are inside the witch's cart at the front of the float. This means, of course, that all the steering mechanics have had to be re-engineered to take all of this into account. But as I'm sure you'll agree, all the work has paid off and resulted in a magnificent float, and in a very original one too. The witch on the front of the float is excellent and is covered entirely with hare's tails. Bridgetown is a small community on the edge of Cannock Chase in South Staffordshire. The Bridgetown Concert Show Band has been in its present form for about 2 years and now has over 50 members. Despite being a relatively new band, they're becoming increasingly well known around Staffordshire and the West Midlands, performing at many fetes and carnivals and processions. This year they've also played at the National Indoor Arena in Birmingham and Granada Studios, Manchester. This is the band's second visit to Jersey, as they also played at last year's battle. The band leader is John Connor, a Jerseyman now living in the West Midlands. This captures the heyday of the Beatles and is the work of the parish of Trinity. Not only is there some exquisite pieces on the float, but there's amazing animation with over 6 independent moving parts. The rules of battle state that flowers are not allowed to be dyed by dipping the heads. That only, of course, applies to the flowers, not hare's tails or marram grass. You are allowed to dye the flowers, though, through the stems, and that's what's been done here to capture the psychedelic colours of the Beatles era. The flowers, instead of being kept in water, are kept in a solution of dye, and as the flower draws the solution through its capillaries, so the head of the flower becomes fused with the appropriate colour. The drum on the back by the Apple, which is there because that was the Beatles' record label, has the most fantastic detailed piece. It revolves, and on one side it features Sgt. Pepper, and on the other, the 4 Beatles, Ringo Starr, Paul McCartney, John Lennon and George Harrison. This is another of the larger class of float, measuring over 42 feet. And I think it can be truly said that that is what flower power is all about. Trinity Parish also have a junior float called To Boldly Go, a theme taken from Star Trek. Some junior floats have just a bit of help from the adults, but I'm informed that this was built and flowered completely by the juniors themselves. This entry comes from the parish of St Peter. It's a fully floral float covered with 30,000 chrysanthemums and thousands of hare's tails. It portrays the plane Memphis Belle and the crew, who were the first to complete 25 missions over enemy territory. Once again, this is an exhibit that features animation. You can see the propellers moving on the wings of the plane. Accompanying the float in traditional uniform are members of the group from St Peter. This float's managed to pick up the Prix d'Excellence award today. That's the runner-up prize, if you like, the second prize in the battle, and in my opinion is well deserving of it too. It's been a fabulous day, and if we could read Miss Battle's mind...
Better than I expected. It's been absolutely wonderful, really great. I can't describe it. The atmosphere here was just wonderful, it really was.
And I'm sure that everyone in the arena enjoyed it just as much, making this most definitely a battle to remember.